Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, there's no doubt that and we're all aware of the unprovoked war that Russia actually has commenced against Ukraine, where there's untold damage and, of course, loss of life. It would appear now on both sides, including Russian troops and Ukrainian civilians and military also. In response to Russia's actions, NATO, which is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and its members in the wider global community has in fact imposed harsh sanctions, economic and financial sanctions on Russia, including freezing Russian central bank assets, targeting wealthy Russian oligarchs and some state-owned banks, and partially restricting its access to the international payment system, which is called SWIFT, and in other words, having an impact on the banking system. Mr. Speaker, sir, this will cause a deep recession in Russia in the event of a prolonged conflict. The sharp depreciation of the ruble has fueled inflation and lowered living standards in Russia. Countries with direct economic ties with Russia will also be affected by the sanctions, with weakened trade, remittances, investment and tourism adversely affecting economic growth, inflation, and, of course, external fiscal accounts. Beyond, of course, the human and economic suffering in Ukraine, sir, the entire global economy is feeling the effects of the conflict through three main channels. First, higher prices for food and energy are pushing up inflation further, even after the pandemic, eroding purchasing power and putting downward pressure on demand. Second, Ukraine's direct trading partners and neighboring countries are experiencing disruptions to trade, supply chains and remittances, not to mention a historic surge in refugee inflows. Lastly, weaker business confidence and high investment uncertainty will lead to a tighter global financial conditioning and possible capital flight from emerging markets. Both Russia and Ukraine are large producers and exporters of key food commodities, minerals and energy. Today, they account for about 30% of global wheat exports, 20% of corn, mineral fertilizers and natural gas exports, and 11% of oil exports. Mr. Speaker, so naturally this war has created sizable global economic and financial shocks, particularly in commodity markets, with the prices of oil, gas and wheat recently soaring. For fuel especially, the conflict has exacerbated the mismatch between global demand and supply, pushing crude oil prices above US $100 a barrel in March, levels not seen actually since 2008. Economies reliant on oil imports like ours will see wider fiscal and trade deficits and inflationary pressures because of the conflict, though some exporters, such as those in the Middle East and in Africa and places like Nigeria, may temporarily benefit from higher prices. This elevated inflation, Mr. Speaker, sir, along with the lack of fiscal space, has prompted many countries to tighten their fiscal and monetary policies, posing further challenges to the economic recovery. If these shocks are sustained over the short term, the OECD, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, expects global GDP growth to reduce by 1 percentage point and inflation to rise by a further 2.5 percentage points. Mr. Speaker, sir, the Ukraine-Russia war has delivered a severe and unfortunate blow to the global economy that will hinder growth and raise prices just as we are starting to bounce back from the pandemic-induced recession. Mr. Speaker, sir, global trade disruptions and inflationary pressure are likely to intensify as the conflict drags on. Fiji is already beginning to experience the spillover effects of these trade shocks, with imported inflation pushing up domestic fuel and food prices in recent months. Fiji is particularly susceptible to fuel price shocks, given that fuel accounts for roughly 1/3 of our total import bill. Domestic fuel prices depend on three factors: the world market price for refined oil, benchmarked by the means of Platts Singapore, international freight rates, and foreign exchange rates. Moreover, sir, refinery margins, distribution costs, insurance, freight and transport costs, and geopolitical pressures also influence the direction of international fuel prices in any given month. The Fijian Competition and Consumer Commission, or FCCC, recently noted that the international price of crude oil is expected to increase significantly in the coming months also, signaling higher domestic prices for refined fuel products in the near term. Mr. Speaker, so notably local retail prices for diesel plus 2.1%, unleaded plus 1.1%, premix plus 10.7%, kerosene plus 1.1%, 4.5 kilogram gas cylinder plus 2.2%, and 12 kilogram gas cylinder plus 4.5%. All have increased in April relative to January this year. So the 9% was critically important, Mr. Speaker, sir, to actually provide some form of relief to ordinary Fijians. Likewise, sir, domestic food prices have risen in line with global supply disruptions. Most notably, the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, or FAO, cereal price index rose in February by 3% over the previous month, and 14.8% from a year ago, reflecting disruptions in the Black Sea region that could potentially hinder exports from Ukraine and Russia. The overall FAO food price index averaged 140.7 points in February, representing a new all-high and a 20.7% increase from a year ago. Mr. Speaker, sir, Fiji's domestic inflation has started to accelerate after remaining in negative territory for nearly 2 years, growing by an average of nearly 2% per month since August 2021. Annual inflation stood at 1.9% in February, with price increases noted for food and non-alcoholic beverages, health and miscellaneous services, offset by lower prices for restaurants and hotels and transportation. Over the next few months, Mr. Speaker, sir, domestic prices are expected to rise further because of fruit and vegetable shortages due to TC Cody-related flooding and global food and fuel supply disruptions due to the Russia-Ukraine war. As a result, year-end inflation is now estimated 4.5% for 2022, followed by 3.3% for 2023 and 2.6% for 2024. To put that into perspective, sir, I had the figures here somewhere about the inflation rates in other countries also. In USA, sir, the inflation rate by the Bureau of Labor Statistics as of February this year stood at 7.9%. India, 6.07%. New Zealand, 5.9% as of December last year. UK, February 22, 5.5%. Singapore, February 2022, 4.3%. Australia, December 21, 3.5%. EU area, as of February 2022, 5.9%. Russia, 9.2%. Germany, February 2022, 5.1%. And Mr. Speaker, sir, countries like, of course, Mauritius is 9%, etc. Mr. Speaker, sir, the Fiji's GDP, of course, Mr. Speaker, sir, is poised for unprecedented rebound. Of course, a lot of this can be tampered with in respect of what will happen with the pricing. That's why, Mr. Speaker, sir, of course, we put in place the revised budget on the 21 items, which is, of course, unprecedented. Fortunately, Mr. Speaker, sir, our foreign reserves are actually quite high because of government, strategically having drawdowns, external drawdowns, which help to cushion the impact of higher commodity prices on our balance of payments position. As of 31 March 2022, foreign reserves are around $3.1 billion, sufficient to cover at least 8.6 months of retained imports, sir. We'll, of course, Mr. Speaker, sir, we'll keep a close eye on the fluctuations of the inflation rate and commodity prices over the next few months, and if necessary, we may consider additional temporary fiscal measures to shield Fijians from volatile global price markets. Thank you, sir.